So this is a continuation of the earlier video. Um, I ran the calculations here in my calculator, and it says find the basic metabolic rates in kilocalories per day. So all I did was plug them into my calculator, and you can see here I could do the 3/4 power. I got 145.7 kilocalories for the rabbit. For the sheep, 1378 about. For the human, about 1774. And for the lion, about 4044. I don't think it's specified what units to round to, so we had some flexibility to decide. Okay, this one, number 12, if you were working on the activity on Monday, probably looks familiar. So let f of x and g of x, but this is asking us to find the sum function and the difference function. So f plus g of x just means to add the two functions, right? So I would just get 6, they're actually the same 3/5 power, so 6 plus a -1 would just be a 5, x to the 3/5, and then f minus g of x, well, minus a negative would be like adding 1, 6, 3 to the 5th. What we need to consider, though, is the domain of each function. But since this function, that one, both f and g, both have odd root, there's no limit. So the domain for both would be all real numbers, which sometimes you'll see it with a capital R with a line through it. There's no limitation. Plug in 32 for each one. Well, let's find out what 32 to the 3/5 power. Well, the 5th root of 32, if I'm not mistaken, is 2. And 2 to the 3rd is 8. So 32 to the 3/5 would be 8. So f plus g of 32 would just be 5 times 8, which is 40. And f minus g of 32 would be 6 times 8, which is 48. Okay, now we're really cruising. Only 2 more questions. Let's do it. Ooh, the quotient and product. Okay, so now we gotta find fg of x. Well, check it out. Multiply these mamma jammas. Half and 8 give you 4. And x to the 3/4 times just a whole x. That'll be x to the 7/4. I'm just adding fractions. 4/4 plus 3/4. And then we could do the quotient. So in this case, the quotient would be, okay, 1/2 divided by 8. 1/2 of those x's. So this one, maybe I'll need a bit more space. So let me go down here. Divided by 8x. Alright, so in this case, maybe we would want to say instead of divide by 8, we can multiply by the reciprocal. So what we end up seeing is that we would get 1/2 times 1/8, which is just 1/16. And we would get x to the 3/4 divided by x, same thing we had over here. And we would get x to the -1/4 power, which we could then rewrite it as 1/16 times, if you wanted to, the 4th root of x. Nice and elegant. And some of you might say, don't leave the roots in the basement, which I know it's something we learned that we shouldn't do, but for some reason the answer keys, well, they didn't convert this, so I don't know, that's annoying. How do we know when we're supposed to? Maybe because we're just being asked to evaluate, it doesn't matter, I don't know. We could multiply this by, well, the thing is, if we got the roofs out of the basement, we're just going to end up back to this. Because we will multiply by x to the 3/4 to top and bottom and cancel that out. It just gives us that x to the 3/4 back on top over 16 and a whole x. So you could use either one. This is going to be nicer to evaluate, which is maybe why the answer key has it there. Because then we just take the 4th root of x one time rather than taking the 3/4 power. Okay, so we have 1 over 16x to the 1/4. So right away we can see here, well, this has a 4th root there, right? So the domain is only x is greater than or equal to 0. This has a domain of all real numbers. So what do they have in common? Well, just x is greater than or equal to 0. Remember though, for the quotient, we need to consider where, well, this one, you can see it actually has an x still in the denominator. But also we just need to consider the fact that g is in the denominator and it has an x, so that can't be 0. So x can't be 0 since there's, so the thing is, this is just has a slight adjustment because x can't be 0, it's not greater than or equal to 0, it would just be greater than 0. Now let's evaluate. Well, what's the 4th root of 16? It's 2. 2 to the 7th is 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128 times 4 is just times 2 more 2's, 2, 56, 512. So f g of x of 16, sorry, is 512. And you could use your calculator for that, but it's fun to do it in your head. And now the 4th root, well, we had just said the 4th root of 16 is 2. 16 times 2 is 32, so f over g of 16 is 1 over 16 times 2, or 1/32. Alright, not too bad, and now we're on the last question. A football player jumps to make a catch. You can see it says here he's jumping 3 feet. The maximum height in feet of the player above the ground is given by the function here. H equals the height equals in feet equals 1/64 times x squared, s squared, where s is the initial speed in feet per second of the player. Find the inverse of the function. Alright, so let's solve for s in terms of h. Multiply by 64. Take the square root. So I could take the square root of 64h, but what you'll see is I could take the square root of 64 because it's a perfect square, but the h I'll leave underneath. So the speed would be 8 times the square root of the height of the jump. We could verify, now it's saying, or use it to find the initial speed of the player shown. Well, in this case it looks like the height is 3, so it would be, his height would be 8 root 3, which if we were to calculate in our calculator, we could get a decimal approximation. 8 times the square root of 3, oops, 13.9 if you wanted to round it to the nearest tenth, or 13.86 to the hundredth. Does it specify here? No, so let's do hundredths here. 13.86, and s is in feet per second. We could verify the functions are inverse functions by plugging one into the other. So shall we try it? Let's plug this in for s. So h equals 1 over 64 s squared, but s is 8 root h squared. Well, let's square that. We would get h equals 1 over 64 times 64h. 64's cancel, h equals h. We're good to go. What I put below here is a fun cumulative assessment that gives some nice resources. Just some reminders of some rules and that sort of thing. It's also got this interesting one where we have the graph here minus a negative would move it left. So since the negative's built in there, -3, and it's been shifted up to +2. Oh, these are nice little reminders for us in rowing, the boat speed in meters per second. Interesting. The area of a triangle, find the value of x, 1/2 base times height. Oops. Interesting. Would equal the area, so 42 would equal 1/2 times x plus 8 times x. So we could multiply, what I would maybe want to do is multiply this by 2 to get rid of the 1/2. And I would get 84 equals x plus 8 times x. And now I could get x squared plus 8x, subtract the 84, and I could solve. I could solve by trying to factor or use the quadratic formula. 84 is indeed, what's that, 21 times 4, that's not it. What are some of my other factors? Well, I also have 42 and 2, it's definitely not that. I could have 7 times 12, is that right? I could have 6 and 6 and 14, is that right? I think that's the combo if I were to do it by factoring. So it'd have to be a positive 14 and a negative 6. Let's just double check. 4, let this be 84, okay. So, the only answer that makes sense, we can't have a negative 14, can we? Because that'll say the height is negative inches. No, so we can't cross this one out, and it's got to be 6 inches. X equals 6. Bada bing, bada boom. Wow, that was a fun one. Have a great day, everybody. You can check out the rest of these if you're interested.